Hello and welcome to Contract from Below. I'm your host, Con, and today I'm joined by Austin.
Hello.
All right, so since this is our first episode, we're just going to cut to the chase, real quick introductions, and then what this podcast is all about. So for me, I play modern EDH, CEDH. I've been playing since RTR block. That's about it.
I also play Modern, I play Commander, and I do play CDH as well. I do tend to dabble more in the jankier of formats.
We're focused on high power EDH. So we're not CEDH as in competitive EDH, and we're not CEDH as in casual EDH. We're more CEDH as in cutthroat EDH. We focus on optimized and higher power lists with a slightly different social contract.
As for what our contract is we tend to, well, we're not trying to win by turn 3, and we're not trying to do that repeatedly. We have obviously high power decks, as we said, but we're not trying to just annihilate our opponents out of nowhere.
Yeah, we're not CEDH, so we still have combos and such, but for a CEDH deck to be viable there, you have to be ready for or able to win near the turn 3 mark. That's kind of the key turn for most CEDH decks.
We are lenient, and we do allow people to kind of take back simple mistakes, but that is given the clause that no information has changed. So, for example, if you just play the wrong land and nothing else has changed on the board, say, oh, I'm sorry, 1 second, you can swap out for the one you actually need. That sort of stuff, completely fine.
Yeah. We stick to a general try to win mentality, so no pure group hug or pure chaos. I mean, you can obviously use cards that benefit other people for political gain. That's totally fine. But generally, pure group hug decks, we really don't like them. I feel like they just make the person to the left of that player win because they're the first one to untap with the extra cards, the extra lands, the extra whatever.
I fully agree. And for me, chaos to me, it just takes a lot of strategy out of the game in favor of randomization. Now, there are ways to play chaotic decks that do try to win, but,
if you're going to play Scrambleverse, you should follow it up with Brand to steal all your cards back. That's a win condition. But just playing Scrambleverse to play it takes like 30 minutes to resolve Scrambleverse, and then the game's
just in a different position that doesn't really benefit one person.
Yeah. We also don't go back on deals. Politics are fine. Hey, I won't destroy any of your creatures, but then I exile them. You have to be careful with your words.
Now, that being said, there are some bad feelings that can go on between games. Like, let's say someone killed you first in a game, and then the next game you play, you kind of want to have it out for them. We don't want people to just have grudges. We want people to make the optimal play, and don't just attack someone because they beat you up last game. Politics are a completely different thing. If someone's known to lie or not follow through with different deals, then you might still not want to make deals with them in the future. And that's a different thing altogether.
Yeah. Don't save a player without political gains. I remember one game, it was you, me, and 2 of our other friends, and I swung at you for lethal. And one of our friends just exiled my creature.
And then I proceeded to just effectively go off on my next turn turn and just storm off and kill everyone at the table. So I was obviously in a pretty good position, but the player to my left just felt bad that I was about to die. It was an optimal play that I was being swung at, and because of someone else's actions, everyone else lost the game.
Yeah, so generally we don't try and save other players. The game has to end. You gotta knock out people. Now, of course, doing that for political gain, always an option. Hey, if you let me gain life with your Kenneth so I don't die here, I'll exile their enchantment. That's a perfectly fine deal.
As long as unless someone says something like, "Oh, don't worry, I'll save you." If that's the start of something, then that typically isn't going to end well for the other players necessarily. Yeah, it's fine to save people if you get something out of it. And it puts you in a viable position to pursue winning the game.
So Rule 0 is a bit of a contentious point. We generally don't use it. We don't really like it. We want to play with the best cards, and in general, we like to build our decks in a way that you're prepared for anything. Also, it makes things too confusing. If someone else comes to the playgroup and they have a card, and then we say, hey, that's not allowed in our playgroup, well, then what do? It's in their deck. Do they have to swap decks? Do they have to just take it out? Just throw it in exile? Like, it's a hassle.
It just confuses players effectively. Like, if you have a ban list for this format, which obviously there is one, then you should be either sticking to it or just don't play the format, I guess.
Yeah. I mean, I'm not, super gung-ho about everything on the ban list, but
no, neither am I.
we try to stick with it just to make it easier for new people to join in with us.
Having the standard is fine as long as you stick to it.
Yeah.
Rule 0 is just a bit of a mess.
Lastly, proxies. We generally think that if you own a copy of it, you can proxy as many as you want. This saves time so you don't have to move your fetch lands out of this deck and into this deck. For the most part, we're proxying mana, like fetches and shocks and duels, because those are typically way too expensive to get additional copies of. And, I don't want to have one of your blue-red decks be superior to the other one because the other one gets mana screwed more often, just because you didn't want to buy a second volcanic island. I'd rather have you be able to play the game.
Of course. And at the end of the day, although money really shouldn't be a barrier to allowing people to play the game, we do allow proxies, of course, for people testing out new decks, as long as they're intending on buying the cards that will be in it eventually. It doesn't have to be immediately, obviously. And you don't want to buy something that you don't know you want to play.
Yeah, if you want to test out things, that's perfectly fine. A lot of these cards are way too expensive to buy and then realize you didn't actually want. Moving on to our next topic. What is the point of this? Why do we choose to play EDH in this manner as opposed to another one? I think that, for me, the biggest thing is it comes down to playability. There's a lot of cards that are really cool, very fun, very interesting, but they're not quite, you can't really play them in CEDH or very casual EDH, usually due to power level reasons. So Armageddon is a perfect example of this. It's probably too good for most casual groups, and it's not very good in CEDH. Like, there are a couple of fringe decks that play, but most meta decks don't play Mass Land Destruction. It's just too slow. It doesn't do enough. But you actually have a deck with Armageddon in it.
I do. I have a decent, pretty high power stacks deck with Daxus the Returned at the helm.
And actually, the last time we played with it, you did Armageddon, but I still won because my artifact deck had so many rocks in it that I was able to still just cast my spells normally and power through it. There's like, our philosophy is like, if you can beat the card, then it's playable because it's beatable. And for the most part, because the card pool is so massive, most anything individually is beatable.
Like, we do have some personal favorite cards as well that don't exactly fall into this because they are very unplayable effectively. And they require build arounds. So it's harder to say that it's based on power level that we can't play these cards in other formats, except in the fact that they are just so low power that it's hard to justify playing them.
Yeah, in the show notes here, you put Salvaging Station, which we both have a deck built around the card.
Yes, Salvaging Station is a personal favorite of both of ours, in that it's very good with effectively baubles. These one mana.
Let me read Salvaging Station for anyone who doesn't know what the card is.
Oh, of course.
So it's 6 generic for an artifact. It has tap, return target non-creature artifact with converted mana cost, 1 or less, from your graveyard to play. Whenever a creature is put into a graveyard from play, untap Salvaging Station.
So this leads to a few different fun combos with it, primarily with, like I was saying, baubles. And a lot of these baubles don't do too much, and they're usually like one-off effects. But with Salvaging Station and these artifacts that don't leave much of an impact in the game suddenly can make much more of one because they're constantly coming back to the battlefield.
Yeah, so one of my favorite examples is Mishra's Bauble. It's a 0 mana artifact. Tap, sacrifice it, look at the top card of target player's library, draw a card at the beginning of the next upkeep. Now, normally this card is like, it's fine, it's whatever, it sees some modern play here and there. But with Salvaging Station, you can be activating Mishra's Bauble multiple times in a turn. You can tap the Salvaging Station to get it back, to draw another card, and then when a creature dies, you untap the station, and then you go again. And if there's a board wipe, you might get 6 or 7 or 8 untap triggers, which will let you draw that many cards on the next upkeep. And you can really do some powerful things. So another reason that we like to play at this sort of power level is time. In general, I've found that Battlecruiser Magic takes forever. If you're just playing creatures on curve, slapping them into each other, and then they sort of don't really die, or there's too many board wipes and nobody has anything other than creatures to win, the games take like 4 hours, and then you get like one game in, and then that's the end of the night.
I think we like it a little more fast-paced than that, and for that reason, we like to run at least some way to end the game, some game-winning combo. It doesn't have to be like what you're going for inherently, but it's nice to just have in the deck.
Yeah, I think the ability in a deck to deal infinite damage is pretty necessary. And like generally, our combos for this are like 4 or 5 cards. They take a lot of setup. But it's important because, well, one, if someone gains infinite life and your commander is not very good at getting in for commander damage, you don't have to lose the game. And second, it can you can build into a I win scenario and the game can be finished. Now, generally, unless someone gets like an absolutely insane hand, none of these combos are assembled before turn 10, really.
Yeah, when they have so many pieces, like some of the ones we run, it just takes time and resources to get them.
And especially if you're not in black. Yeah, if you're not in black, though, you don't have enough tiers to get most of the pieces anyway.
This is why you have to run more colors in all your decks.
Yeah. We'll be talking about your 5-color decks later. Lastly, creative merit, honestly, is a big thing.
because at this power level, there's a lot less that is limiting what we're playing. There's a lot of cards that we're just allowed to play that we would not typically be able to. And for that reason, this specific high power EDH allows us to effectively flex our deck building skills. And it leads to a lot more optimization in just the different decks that we try and play.
Yeah, with this, the way that we play, the most amount of cards are viable out of any other format or way of playing the game.
I think the most common way that we tend to end up starting to build a deck is we find a card that we really want to build around. Now, these cards have been, there's just so many that we've tried. I think that would have to be a whole other segment.
We'll have to talk about deck building philosophy on a separate episode.
Oh, of course.
So moving on, we're going to talk about some examples of decks in this space. Let's start with one of yours.
So I have a deck built around the tribe Spell Shapers. They are a class tribe built around activated abilities that allow them to tap and discard a card and pay some mana to have some effect. These effects are similar to spells that are in the game, but on their own they are not very playable, especially the legendary ones, which require you to discard 2 cards for their effects. But in my list, I have Kenrith the Returned King at the command zone, and he has a lot of abilities.
Oh, real quick, I will have links to the deck lists in the show notes or in the description.
It's better that than having to read out every single one of the abilities on these creatures, because
nobody's going to know what any of these.
No one's going to know this. I'm sorry. What is Magetsu the Lion?
Yeah.
But anyway, though, the deck itself is a 5-color tribal deck, and it is easily one of the jankiest decks I have. It's built around these Spell Shapers, yes, but they needed a lot of support to be playable. And that basically comes at the price of a lot of card draw and a lot of different tutors for exactly what you want. Let's see.
And you kind of have a hidden commander in the 99, right?
I do. My so-called hidden commander is Squee Goblin Nabob, because at the beginning of your upkeep, he returns from your graveyard to hand, so you just keep discarding him. He was actually recently reprinted in, I think, the Madness commander deck.
Yeah, Recon? Yeah. He was in the Rakdos one.
So he might be a little more well-known than he has been before.
The way we're going to handle lands on this podcast is for the color fixing ones, we're going to pretty much skip over them. If you have fetches and duels, put them in your deck. If you don't have them, then don't put them in your deck. Put Guildgates or whatever you can do. The best color fixing you can get, go with. We will, however, talk about utility lands or anything in the land section that's integral to the deck strategy.
Now, I wouldn't say the utility lands in my Spell Shaper deck are the most integral to the strategy, but I do run a Cavernous Souls because most of my Spell Shapers are humans and it allows my commander to come down without any interference. Beyond that, I run Bojuka Bog. A little extra graveyard hate's always useful, especially in this format where graveyard strategies tend to be a little more prevalent. And I run a Path of Ancestry, just to get a little extra value off of casting all my creatures.
So moving on to the ramp package. What do you got?
Well, most people would run something like a Rampant Growth or, I don't know, Kodama's Reach or something, but we're playing Spell Shapers. Those are too good for us. So instead, I run 2 main cards. They're different Spell Shapers. The first one is Dreamscape Artist. It just 2 mana 1/1. It casts Harrow, so sacrifice a land, get 2 more basics on the battlefield. That's a form of ramp.
They come into play untapped too. Like it's pretty
They
good.
do. If you have a reducer like Training Grounds in play, then it's just one mana to get 2 basic lands untapped.
So yeah, it's a ritual at that point.
Beyond that, I do run Silverglade Pathfinder though. Another 2 mana 1/1. Pay 2 mana, pitch a card. It's rampant growth. What more do you want? Beyond that, I do run some artifact ramp, but I don't run too much because I do run 1 Spell Shaper that destroys a lot of artifacts. So I don't really want too many non-bows with that. I also have a Llanowar Mentor, which casts Llanowar Elves. Like, those are my main ways of generating mana. And the fact that they're reusable means I can run a few less as long as I have the tutors to get them.
So the deck's main theme is obviously tribal synergies.
Yes, of course.
What are some of the sub-themes or ideas within the deck?
Well, as all these creatures have activated abilities, it makes sense that I'm running things like Training Grounds just to reduce the cost of that, as well as Biomancer's Familiar for effectively a second copy. So after the Spell Shapers theme is obviously the activated ability theme, and that actually works quite well with my commander, which is why I'm very glad that he came out recently.
Yeah, he was a good addition to the deck because before this,
very good addition.
Yidris doesn't do anything with Spell Shapers.
He builds up the board, I guess, but he's nowhere near as good as Kenrith in this deck.
Yeah, Kenrith is such a powerful card.
He's a very powerful card.
What are some of the strengths and the weaknesses of this deck?
The most glaring weakness is the fact that effectively my instants and sorceries die to board wipes.
Yes, pretty rough. Yeah, Cyclonic Rift gets your instants and sorceries as well.
Oh no. I try and dodge that though with a few extra pieces just to deal with it. I have a Teferi's Protection. I do have a Heroic Intervention and a decent amount of counter magic. Most of it reusable on Spell Shapers, obviously.
Yeah.
So yeah, having my entire board die to removal kind of sucks, but it's fine because in most cases, everything I'm casting in inverted quotations is effectively uncounterable because it's all activated abilities.
Yeah, when you resolve one of these, I think it's Stronghold Machinist that counters non-creature spells. That one on the board is really rough to deal with.
Mm-hmm.
Just once it's resolved, it's very annoying.
Diplomatic Escort also fills a similar role because it's able to counter the spells that target my creatures.
So
there's also a Stronghold Biologist, which counters creature spells for double blue.
That one's also pretty rough. All right. What are some hidden gems or kind of cards that surprised you and how well they did?
I'd say there are 2 main cards that are rather recent additions to the deck. Primarily Steely Resolve. It's green and 1 for enchantment. It enters the battlefield, you get to choose a creature type, and creatures of that type have Shroud effectively. Primarily its use is defensive, but there are cases where you can name certain creature types just to prevent people from doing shenanigans with their creatures. Another addition, though, that has decently surprised me in how it's performed is Statecraft.
Yeah.
Blue and 3 for an enchantment. Prevent all combat damage to be dealt to and by creatures you control. I'm not attacking anyway, so there's no reason for me to not run it. Now I Now all my 1/1s and such are like incredible blockers.
Yeah, it's a very weird card, but like it's honestly really annoying. Like if you have it down, I just can't attack into you, even though your board is just like 3/1/1s.
Yeah, they're kind of garbage.
That deck kind of shows sort of the goofier kind of some of the stranger types of decks that we build.
Yeah, I would definitely say this is my weirdest deck, but it's also one of my favorites, just because of that fact in itself.
It's a lot of fun to play against, honestly, because I there's so much utility in it that there's always something you can do or some weird roundabout way to get around something, and I think it's fun.
Should we move on to one of your decks that has a little more solid of a strategy, I'd say?
Yeah, so we'll move on to my Mina and Den deck. I actually have a full primer for this one, which I've linked here. So this deck, honestly, I've been working on it for like a long time, and it's just kind of a very optimized lands deck with a couple of value engines inside.
I'd say it's a very fair deck, wouldn't you?
it it's like too fair is the thing. So, the deck really just wants to ramp into really big things. Titans, foreign collects, etc., etc. It's a lands deck. And the way the deck mostly plays out is just time and time again you have threat after threat after threat until the opponent runs out of answers.
Yeah, no one's gonna top deck better than this. Just keeps going.
If you've ever played Tron in Modern, it feels kind of like that, where your top decks are just better than your opponent's top decks. I played Tron for like 5 years. So we'll move on to the mana base real quick. This one I will touch on some of the fixing stuff. I think that the fetches are really important in this deck. You really want to be able to hit those land drops out of the graveyard to get multiple lands a turn, or be able to just double up on landfall triggers and so on and so forth. So the fetches are really important here. Oh, you know what? I guess people probably know what Kenrith is, but I don't know if people know Mina and Den. It's a 4-mana 4/4 in the Gruul colors. You may play an additional land on each of your turns, and you can pay red, green, bounce a land to your hand. Target creature gains trample until end of turn. I like them because they're innocuous, but they provide value.
They do provide a lot of value, but they also don't necessarily have a massive target on the back, which is a lot to be said, especially in comparison to some of the creatures you have in here, which could very well be the commander, but...
Yeah, I mean, Borborygmos was originally the commander for this deck, but he costs so much mana.
That's a lot of mana.
A couple other things in the land base. There is one snow-covered forest and one snow-covered mountain. That's in there specifically because of cards like Field of the Dead, where you want to have extra land names. So whenever you have something that tutors up a basic, like Rampant Growth, I usually grab one of the snow-covered ones first to up those land name counts.
Very interesting, but yeah, makes sense. I hate it.
Field of the Dead is it's so good.
It's a very powerful card.
It's an all-star card in the deck. Another all-star is Valakut.
Of course.
You can bounce your mountains to your hand, play them, you get multiple bolts a turn. Thespian Stage is another important one. Getting a second Field of the Dead or a second Valakut is very important. Lets you really power out an army or a lot of bolts.
I'll be honest, I'm still very surprised that Valakut is just not legendary.
Yeah, it's the Molten Pinnacle, but it's definitely not, because you can have 4 Molten Pinnacles.
I guess.
The 2 most important lands, I think, would be Glacial Chasm, which Glacial Chasm is a land that does not tap for mana, has a cumulative upkeep of paying 2 life, so 2, then 4, then 6. When it enters the battlefield, you have to sacrifice a land. Creatures you control can't attack. Prevent all damage that would be dealt to you. This card is backbreaking for so many decks. And with your commander, you can just bounce back your hand, swing, play it, take no damage, bounce it back to hand, swing, play it. It's really powerful.
Obviously, you need something to be able to support that enter the battlefield cost, though. Something like your a Crucible of Worlds or a Ramunap Excavator.
Yeah, which the deck has both and many tutors for at least the Ramunap. The other most important land is Eye of Ugin. Eye of Ugin. I almost said Eye of Ugin. Makes your Eldrazi cost 2 less, and you can pay 7 generic, tap it to tutor up a colorless creature card, reveal it, put it in your hand. So this kind of brings to the main value engine of the deck, is Eye of Ugin and Kozilek. Specifically, OG Kozilek, Butcher of Truth. You can tutor up your Kozilek, play him, and then if he gets countered or is killed, he shuffles back in the deck, and then you can tutor him up again. And to protect him from getting exiled, we have cards like High Market, so you can sacrifice him in response to like a Path to Exile. With this setup, eventually you'll get to the point where you have enough mana that you can cast and activate Eye of Ugin and cast Kozilek, and eventually your opponents will run out of answers for Kozilek.
At that point, there's just no coming back from that. In order to stop this from happening, you need some sort of graveyard hate and a repeated source of it to just stop this deck from doing exactly what it's trying to do.
Yeah, you'll notice that in this deck there's only 22 creatures, but it wins mostly via creatures, and that's just because you're often looping Eldrazi, tutoring one Kozilek, then the other Kozilek, and shuffling them both in, and then tutoring them both, and just you're using the same threat over and over again.
I mean, hey, that's one way to get around having one copy of everything in the deck. Just keep reusing it.
Yeah. Some other sub-themes would just be like generally land shenanigans. We're playing Omnath, we're playing Titania, Tireless Tracker. The other thing is the way the CMCs of the creatures are constructed. So other than the commander and Titania, who's a 5-drop, every single creature is either 3 mana or less, or 6 mana and greater. The reason for that is a combination of 2 cards. Woodland Bellower, green 4 for a 6/5 beast. When Woodland Bellower enters the battlefield, you may search your library for a non-legendary green creature. Convert a mana cost 3 or less. Put it onto the battlefield, then shuffle your library. And the other card is Fierce Empath. Green 2 for a 1/1 elf. When Fierce Empath enters the battlefield, you may search your library for a creature card. Convert a mana cost 6 or more. Reveal it, put it in your hand, then shuffle your library. So, Woodland Bellower can get Fierce Empath, which can then get any large creature I want. Any 6 CMC or higher. Fierce Empath can get Woodland Bellower, which can get any 3 CMC or lower creature I want. So either of those creatures will ultimately tutor basically any creature in the deck, other than Titania.
At first glance, I would expect that this would make you run into issues with your curve. But the fact that Mina and Den is a 4-drop and gives you an additional land.
It actually just, it works. It ends up working perfectly. Let's talk about ramp real quick. The deck plays all the usual suspects. I mean, Nature's Lore, Ramp and Growth, Cultivate, Kodama's Reach, Exploration. Generally what you would assume to be in one of these decks. There's only a little bit of mana ramp. Mana Crypt, Mana Vault, and Soul Ring. They're just kind of too good not to play. Yeah. And lastly, the deck has like a weird kind of spicy combo. It's explained in the primer. It's 5 cards.
Is the combo still in the deck?
Yeah. They're all individually good, and if I happen to have all of them, I can win the game.
Technically.
Yeah. It's Golden Safekeeper, which is a 1 mana 1/1, sack a land, target creature you control gains Shroud. Amulet of Vigor, 1 mana artifact. When a permanent enters the battlefield tapped, under your control, untap it. Splendid Reclamation, Green and 3, return all lands from your yard to the battlefield tapped. Valakut the Molten Pinnacle. You'll need at least like 6 other mountains, but that's not hard to do in this deck. You'll need to have other mountains to play for this. And Mirror Pool, which has a couple of effects. It enters tapped, but you can, the important one for this is 2 generic and a colorless, sacrifice it, copy target instant or sorcery spell you control. You may choose new targets for the copy.
I do love this combo, but I do not remember the last time you've done it, just because you don't really need it in the deck, but like we were saying earlier, it's nice to have it just in case.
And all the cards are like, there's none of these are cards I want to cut anyway.
No, of course. They're all pretty good cards.
The weakest is probably Amulet of Vigor, but it does let me do shenanigans with the green hideaway land. So the way this combo works is you cast Splendid Reclamation, and you hold priority, sacrifice all your lands to Sylvan Safekeeper, targeting itself, except for the Mirror Pool. Now you'll want to float all your mana before you sack your lands. Then you activate Mirror Pool, copying the Splendid Reclamation. So now another Splendid Rec goes on the stack. When that one resolves, it'll put all of the lands back into play. Tapped, of course. And you'll have a bunch of Valakut triggers. Then you'll have an Amulet of Vigor trigger. You let that resolve, you untap all your lands. Before you let the Valakut triggers resolve, you can sack all your lands again to the Sylvan Safekeeper and do it over and over again. And you'll eventually just have infinite Valakut triggers on the stack. You can blast away all the creatures and players.
And infinite Sylvan Safekeeper activations on the stack.
Yeah.
All of them will fizzle level 1.
Yep. You can also use Field of the Dead now, since that's a new addition, to make infinite zombies this way. There's no haste enablers in the deck, so like you'll have to pass the turn. Or if you have Borborygmos and Gruul Turf can just bounce itself, and then you can pitch it to deal 3 damage with Borborygmos and do that for infinite damage.
I was personally a fan of when you ran Sunscorched Desert as part of this package.
We'll talk about your addiction to deserts on another episode.
Yeah, fine. I love me a desert package.
But yeah. As for some like breakout, standout cards, I'd have to shout out Sarkhan's Unsealing. This card is so underrated.
Yeah, I'm constantly afraid of it.
The foils are like $1.50 right now. You should buy them. It's red and 3 for an enchantment from M19. Whenever you cast a creature spell with power 4, 5, or 6, it deals 4 damage to any target. Pretty good. When you cast a creature with power 7 or greater, it deals 4 damage to each opponent, each creature, and each planeswalker they control.
It's just so much value, and you can immediately trigger it with your commander alone.
Yeah, the fact that Mina Den gets to come down and just blast planeswalkers is so good. And it's on cast. It's not on ETB of the creature, so like it's just, yeah, the card's so good.
It's just so much value. It's just so much damage.
The other card that I think puts in too much work is I think the only unfair card in the deck.
Oh, really?
Natural Order. If you've never played this card before, it's busted. It's super insane. It's a little pricey right now at like $18, but it's green 2. As an additional cost, you have to sacrifice a green creature, search your library for a green creature, put it on the battlefield. Man, the amount of times I have just cheated Vorinclex into play with this is disgusting.
It's not fair.
The card is...
It's just not fair at all.
It's just busted. Now, if it gets countered, you did 2 for 1 yourself because you have to sack a creature. But, like, man, yeah. But for the most part, this deck is very fair. You play lands, you cast creatures, you swing creatures. Nothing too crazy, but Natural Order is just... It's so
good not to include, though, as well. When you have such a nice top end like Vorinclex or Borborygmos, it's just a lot.
Yeah. It's quite good. And then one it's on the online list. I haven't picked up one in on paper yet, but Dryad of the Elysian Grove, been testing out. I think this card is super good. Obviously, it's super insane with Valakut, and it's the ramps. It's all you really want.
And if it comes down to it and you run out of fetchable targets, hey, those fetch lands are now mountains and forests. It's fine.
That is true. I have run out of fetchable targets many a time.
Even though you're running 48 lands.
Well, all right, look. I'm down from 49.
God. It makes sense. It makes sense in the deck. It's just a lot of lands.
So that's another example of a deck that we play in our play group that's at this power level. If I had to put both of these decks on a 1 to 10 scale, I think Mina and Den is like an 8 or 9. It's not Seed H, but it's fully optimized. What would you put Kenrith at?
I put it like a 6 or 7. It's not that strong, but it has a lot of utility and can pretty much get out of most situations. It's prepared for just about anything, and there are ways to end the game, but it's not the best.
Yeah. So after all this, if you stuck with us, thank you. And if you are interested in just increasing maybe the power level of your play group or trying out EDH for the first time or playing EDH in a new way, I think that this might be a good resource for you if you like podcasts. Hopefully you stick with us. And if you have any feedback or questions, we have a Twitter. We are at Contract From. You can find us there, tweet at us, and we'll answer questions when we get them, if we get them.
I'm sure we'll have a section for it in the future.
Yeah, for sure.
Thank you for joining us.